On this day in history, we remember the remarkable individuals who shaped our world. Welcome to Who Died Today in History, where we honor their legacies. From artists to leaders, their impact lives on. If you find their stories meaningful, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay connected. John F. Kennedy Jr.'s death on July 16, 1999, was sudden, tragic, and eerily reflective of the burdens and expectations placed upon those born into political dynasties. At just 38 years old, Kennedy Jr., son of the assassinated President John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, perished when the small plane he was piloting crashed into the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. His wife, Carolyn Besset Kennedy, and her sister Lauren also died in the accident. The crash was ruled accidental, attributed to pilot disorientation during night flight over water, a condition known as spatial disorientation. This event was not just the death of a beloved public figure. It felt like the end of an era. John Jr. was often seen as the embodiment of American royalty, a charismatic, handsome man who had grown up in the shadow of one of the most iconic and tragic presidencies in American history. His salute as a young boy at his father's funeral procession was forever etched into the national memory. His death evoked a profound sense of collective loss, not only for what was, but for what might have been. In many ways, his passing echoed the values and contradictions of his time. John Jr. had distanced himself from politics, instead founding George, a political and pop culture magazine aimed at a new, media-savvy generation. His interest in redefining civic engagement for the modern era clashed with expectations that he would follow his father's path into public office. That tension between tradition and reinvention was at the heart of his life and made his death feel all the more poignant. The immediate consequences were an outpouring of public mourning and intense media scrutiny, reflective of the Kennedy family's perennial place under the spotlight. His death reanimated the myth of the Kennedy curse, a narrative built on the family's string of premature and tragic losses. But rather than diminish his legacy, it deepened it. John Jr. became a symbol of unfulfilled promise, a link between the mythic past and a future never realized. We immortalize John F. Kennedy Jr. through documentaries, retrospectives, and the continued cultural fascination with the Kennedy family. His life and death serve as a reminder of the fragility of even the most privileged lives and of America's enduring hunger for icons who blend glamour, tragedy, and the hope of something greater. His legacy endures in the balance between destiny and individuality, an echo of his father's dream, carried briefly and lost too soon. Carolyn Besset Kennedy's life and death were bound to a legacy she never sought, but ultimately embodied with grace and mystique. On July 16, 1999, Carolyn died tragically alongside her husband, John F. Kennedy Jr., and her sister, Lauren Bessette, when the small plane John was piloting crashed into the Atlantic Ocean near Martha's Vineyard. The accident was attributed to spatial disorientation in poor visibility, an abrupt, heart-wrenching end to lives lived under extraordinary public scrutiny. Carolyn, a former Calvin Klein publicist, had been thrust into the spotlight upon her marriage to America's most famous bachelor. Her elegance, reserved demeanor, and fashion sense drew comparisons to Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, and media fascination quickly escalated into obsessive attention. The couple represented a new generation of American royalty, handsome, modern, and deeply private. Yet, the relentless glare of paparazzi and tabloid culture in the late 1990s reflected a society increasingly hungry for spectacle and intimacy with its icons. Carolyn's discomfort in the public eye revealed the growing tension between fame and personal autonomy during an era of intensifying media intrusion. Her death was felt as more than the loss of a private individual. It signified the crumbling of a modern fairy tale, one that many had projected their hopes and nostalgia upon. In the immediate aftermath, the nation mourned not only the Kennedys, but also the fragility of idealized love and legacy. The tragedy amplified Carolyn's legend. In death, she became a symbol of elegance silenced too soon, a woman remembered not for scandal or fame hunting, but for her restraint and dignity in impossible circumstances. The enduring fascination with Carolyn is preserved in photographs, biographies, and cultural reflection. Her minimalism and poise have inspired fashion retrospectives and continue to influence public discourse about the burdens placed on women in the public sphere. Through books, documentaries, and the quiet reverence with which she is remembered, Carolyn Besset Kennedy is immortalized not just as a Kennedy wife, but as a symbol of complexity, vulnerability, and the cost of fame. Her death, alongside John's, reminds us of mortality's indifference to legacy, and how power, whether political or cultural, cannot shield us from fate. Yet memory, shaped through storytelling and tribute, allows figures like Carolyn to remain vivid long after they are gone. In her silence, she left a resonance that speaks volumes. Jane Birkin's death on July 16, 2023, marked the end of an era defined by effortless style, artistic collaboration, and bold individuality. She passed away peacefully at the age of 76 in her Paris apartment after battling health issues for several years, including a mild stroke in 2021. Though her death was natural, it carried symbolic weight, signaling the fading of a cultural epoch in which art, fashion, and rebellion coalesced with authenticity and charm. Birkin's life unfolded like a chanson, melancholic, romantic, defiant. The English-born singer, actress, and model became a French icon through her collaboration, both romantic and artistic, with Serge Gainsbourg. Their 1969 duet, Je t'aime, Moi non plus, was banned in multiple countries for its sensuality, yet it captivated millions and cemented her role as a provocateur in a time of sweeping sexual and social liberation. Her death, decades later, offered a moment to reflect on how she had embodied the bold spirit of the late 20th century, when norms were being challenged and cultural boundaries blurred. The immediate aftermath of Birkin's passing saw tributes from across the globe. In France, where she had become a symbol of artistic freedom and grace, national leaders praised her contribution to culture. Fans gathered outside her Paris home, leaving flowers and notes, reminiscent of the way the French had honored other beloved cultural figures. Her absence was not just personal, it was generational. Her death triggered a re-evaluation of the feminist, bohemian spirit she carried and the quiet strength with which she aged in the public eye. In many ways, her death amplified her legend. The Birkin bag, named after her by Hermès, remains a status symbol, but her true legacy lies in her rejection of convention, her support for humanitarian causes, and her vulnerable artistry. She lived with elegance, but also with protest, often using her platform to advocate for women's rights and refugee support. As such, her memory transcends fashion or fame. Jane Birkin's passing reminds us how cultural figures can reflect an era's dreams, contradictions, and transformations. We immortalize them not only through luxury items or retrospective albums, but through the ideals they leave behind: freedom, expression, and humanity. Her legacy will live on in film reels, vinyl grooves, and the hearts of those drawn to the beautifully unconventional. George A. Romero, the legendary filmmaker known as the father of the modern zombie genre, died on July 16, 2017, at the age of 77. His death was from lung cancer, a natural end to a life devoted to redefining horror cinema. Romero passed peacefully in his sleep, listening to the score from The Quiet Man, surrounded by family. Yet the quietness of his final moments stood in stark contrast to the revolutionary impact of his work, a body of films that gnawed at the edges of societal norms and cultural fears. Romero's passing reflected a transitional moment in cinematic history. As film increasingly leaned into computer-generated spectacle and franchise saturation, his death marked the fading of an era where horror was deeply personal, political, and subversive. His 1968 film Night of the Living Dead not only launched the zombie genre as we know it, but also challenged racial and political boundaries by casting a black actor, Dwayne Jones, as the lead in a time of national civil unrest. The film's chilling final scene, where the protagonist is mistakenly shot by a white militia, echoed the violence and injustice of the civil rights era, embedding Romero's work with searing social commentary. The immediate aftermath of Romero's death saw an outpouring of grief and admiration from fans, critics, and fellow filmmakers. His influence stretched beyond horror into popular culture at large. Filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino, Edgar Wright, and Jordan Peele have cited him as a foundational influence. The zombie archetype he created has endured through decades, from video games to blockbuster franchises like The Walking Dead and World War Z, all tracing their lineage to Romero's gritty black-and-white vision. Romero's death did not just amplify his legend, it crystallized his place as a cultural prophet. His zombies were never just monsters. They were metaphors for consumerism, racism, militarism, and social apathy. He turned horror into a mirror, forcing audiences to confront the dead within the living. In reflecting on Romero's passing, we are reminded of humanity's need to wrestle with its fears, of death, dehumanization, and decay. We immortalize figures like Romero not through statues or museums, but through the living legacy of the stories they tell. His films remain haunting and vital, forever stalking the intersection of art, fear, and truth. Joe Bryant, father of NBA legend Kobe Bryant, passed away on July 14, 2023, at the age of 69 from natural causes. Known to fans as Jelly Bean, Joe Bryant was more than just the father of a superstar. He was a former NBA player and international coach who left an indelible mark on the game. His death, while not unexpected due to age and declining health, resonated deeply with those who followed both his career and his role in shaping Kobe's legacy. Bryant's passing came at a time when the basketball world was still mourning the tragic loss of his son Kobe in 2020. In many ways, Joe's life and death became entwined with the complex narrative of generational impact, athletic excellence, and familial legacy. He played 8 seasons in the NBA during the 1970s and early 1980s, a time when the league was expanding globally but still battling for mainstream respect. Later, Joe made his greatest contributions off American soil, playing and coaching in Europe, particularly in Italy, where he exposed a young Kobe to the game that would later define his life. The immediate aftermath of Joe Bryant's death saw quiet but meaningful tributes from across the basketball community. Unlike the global spectacle of his son's memorial, Joe's remembrance was more intimate, reflecting the quieter role he played in the public eye. Yet his influence was profound. He helped shape Kobe's work ethic, international perspective, and love of basketball, elements that helped elevate the NBA into a global phenomenon. Joe's death didn't shift history in the way a president's assassination or a revolutionary's execution might, but it did serve as a poignant closing chapter to a story that spanned 2 basketball dynasties, one humble, one iconic. His passing offered a moment of reflection on the sacrifices and shadows of great legacies, the fathers behind the icons, the mentors behind the stars. What Joe Bryant's life and death reveal about humanity is our deep investment in legacy, how greatness is often forged through family, culture, and quiet perseverance. He is immortalized not through towering statues or best-selling biographies, but through the ripple effects of his guidance, felt most vividly in the towering achievements of his son. In remembering Joe Bryant, we remember that behind every legend stands another whose story, though less told, is no less vital. Celia Cruz, the undisputed queen of salsa, died on July 16, 2003, at the age of 77 after a battle with brain cancer. Her passing marked the end of an era, not only for Latin music, but also for a generation of exiles and artists who used their voices to preserve culture in the face of political upheaval. Cruz, who fled her native Cuba after the 1959 revolution, became an icon of both musical excellence and cultural resistance. Her vibrant presence celebrated across the Spanish-speaking world and beyond. Cruz's death was the result of natural causes, but the emotional weight it carried was immense. Diagnosed with a brain tumor in 2002, she underwent surgery and briefly returned to the stage, determined to continue performing despite her declining health. This resolve echoed the values of her era: resilience, passion, and a refusal to be silenced, particularly among artists in exile who carried the burdens of lost homelands and unspoken grief. Her flamboyant style, her shout of "Azúcar" in nearly every performance, and her defiant celebration of joy and identity served as an antidote to the pain of displacement and political repression. The immediate aftermath of Cruz's death saw a tremendous outpouring of grief. Her body lay in state in Miami and New York, where thousands came to pay their respects. For many Latinos in the United States and across the diaspora, her passing felt like losing a piece of home. Her funeral was not only a farewell, but a celebration of a woman who had become a living symbol of cultural pride, especially for Cuban Americans who saw in her a reminder of the Cuba they once knew. Cruz's death amplified her legend. In the years following, her music continued to be reissued, sampled, and reimagined. She became the subject of murals, documentaries, biographical series, and even a U.S. postage stamp. Her legacy lives on not just through recordings, but through the enduring vitality of Afro-Caribbean music and its global reach, something Cruz herself helped pioneer. In reflecting on Celia Cruz's death, we see how mortality intersects with power, not political power, but the power of cultural preservation and expression. Cruz reminds us that even in death, a voice can continue to sing. Through celebration, remembrance, and continued artistic tribute, we ensure that such figures remain not in the past, but eternally alive in the rhythm of our shared memory. Biz Marky, born Marcel Theo Hall, passed away on July 16, 2021, at the age of 57 due to complications from type 2 diabetes. His death, while natural, came after a prolonged period of health struggles that had largely taken him out of the public eye in the years prior. Known affectionately as the Clown Prince of hip-hop, Biz Marky's passing marked a significant moment in the evolution of hip-hop culture, one that highlighted the genre's aging pioneers and the importance of preserving its early roots. His death reflected deeper cultural and generational shifts. In the 1980s and early 1990s, Biz Marky brought humor, beatboxing, and storytelling into the spotlight at a time when hip-hop was still shaping its identity. His breakout hit, Just a Friend, 1989, mixed vulnerability with comedy, helping to widen the mainstream appeal of rap music. That he died from a condition that disproportionately affects African American communities is also telling of systemic health disparities, issues that hip-hop itself often addresses but cannot escape. The immediate response to his death was an outpouring of respect from across the music industry. Tributes poured in from peers like LL Cool J and Questlove, as well as from younger artists influenced by his groundbreaking style. His passing reminded many of the genre's early days, when hip-hop was raw, community-based, and deeply expressive rather than corporatized and globalized as it is today. Biz Marky's death didn't so much shift history's course as it spotlighted the legacy of joy and authenticity he left behind. He was a reminder that hip-hop wasn't always about aggression or flash. It was also about laughter, relatability, and soul. His beatboxing skills, DJ work, and willingness to be unabashedly goofy stood as a counter-narrative to more hardened images of masculinity in rap. In the years since, his image and sound have been preserved through documentaries, digital tributes, and the continued sampling of his voice. His likeness has appeared in murals, and his contributions are taught in hip-hop history courses. Through these means, art, music, and memory, we immortalize figures like Biz Marky, not only for what they created, but for the spirit they embodied. Ultimately, his death reminds us that legacy isn't always built on dominance or drama. It can also be etched in joy, in uniqueness, and in the echoes of a beatbox loop that once made the world smile. James Gammon, the gravel-voiced actor best known for playing grizzled, down-to-earth characters in films and television, died on July 16, 2010, at the age of 70. His death was the result of adrenal and liver cancer, a natural cause that reflects not only the fragility of life, but also the often quiet and unsung nature of working-class stardom in American culture. Gammon's passing didn't send political shockwaves through history, but it marked the end of a unique chapter in Hollywood's depiction of rugged masculinity. Gammon was not a leading man in the traditional sense, but his presence was unforgettable. Whether as Lou Brown, the gravelly-voiced manager in Major League, or as the emotionally raw father in Things We Lost in the Fire, he gave audiences characters grounded in grit and honesty. His roles reflected the values of an earlier cinematic era, one where character actors shaped the soul of a story. His death, while not sudden or tragic in the public sense, came at a time when Hollywood was shifting towards sleeker digital narratives, and in many ways, it underscored the fading of a particular kind of raw, blue-collar authenticity in storytelling. The immediate consequence of Gammon's passing was an outpouring of admiration from fellow actors, directors, and fans who valued the quiet power of his craft. His death reminded the industry of the importance of character actors, those who, without headline fame, elevate every scene they're in. For viewers, his death was a nostalgic moment that drew attention to the emotional weight and moral ambiguity that his characters often carried, remnants of an era when flawed men bore the burden of family, failure, and redemption. While his death did not shift the course of history, it deepened the appreciation for the type of roles he championed. Working men, emotionally restrained yet profoundly human. It reminded audiences that power does not always reside in political office or celebrity, but in the honest portrayal of the everyday man. We remember James Gammon through the characters he left behind, through rewatched films, and tributes in interviews and retrospectives. In an industry often obsessed with reinvention and youth, Gammon's legacy reminds us of the enduring value of depth, integrity, and the power of a voice that tells the truth, even if it growls.